This week, Shaul Mofaz is going to come to the United States. Actually, tomorrow, I think Monday or Tuesday. He's going to come to the US. He's going to tell the administration that the Israelis have agreed to postpone their unilateral withdrawal from Gaza. Because the Bush administration said to them, to the Israelis, we don't want you to pull out of Gaza because that's going to create instability in Gaza. Not because we really care about the Gazan people, but because it's not going to be good for the president's re-election. So Shaul Mofaz is coming to tell the president, yes, they're going to do what he asked for, and of course, get paid for that concession.
$2 billion.
Hassan Ayloush started by telling you why cares about the issue of Palestine. Why you should care about the issue of Palestine from a humanitarian point of view, if you're Palestinian, because your land and your homeland is there, if you're an Arab or a Muslim or a person of conscience, you're very concerned about what's happening to the Palestinians. But I'll tell you there's another component, and I wanted to share that with you. About 3 years ago, I attended a hearing at the Judiciary Committee, House Judiciary Committee. They held a hearing about something very domestic, totally American domestic issue that has nothing to do with the issue of Palestine. It was about secret evidence and the use of secret evidence. It was full committee hearing, and they had 8 people. Some of you might have heard me tell the story before. They had 8 people to testify. 4 who thought it was a great idea in the 21st century, well, it was the 20th century then, to use this secret evidence and to put people in jail without ever charging them with a crime, without ever accusing them of a crime, without having their attorneys have the right to view what is the reason they are being locked up. 4 people thought it was a great idea in America to do that. 4 thought it was a bad idea, and the 4 who thought it was a bad idea, one of them was one of the country's most notable constitutional scholars, David Cole from Georgetown University. The other was the youngest law professor ever to have tenure at Stanford University, Tom Campbell, who was also a member of Congress, and David Bonnier, who was also a member of Congress. And the 4th person was one of our sisters whose brother was being held on secret evidence. Now, the 4 who thought it was a good idea in America to use secret evidence, all 3 of them, 4 of them, 3 have official positions. One was the executive director of the ADL in Chicago. One was a representative of the American Jewish Committee. A 3rd was representing some other pro-Israel organization. And the 4th was a person whose daughter was an Israeli citizen who was killed in a suicide bombing in Gaza. So if you don't think that the issue of Palestine affects your daily life, well, think again. But now for you and I, who do not necessarily need to be sold on the issue of Palestine and on the need to support the Palestinian people, why is it that we have not done as good of a job as we could have done in reaching out to the rest of America? Because the American people have always a radio station playing in the back of their heads. You know that radio station, WIFM. What's in it for me? You tell an American, well, the Palestinians are really suffering under the Israeli occupation. Well, the Haitians are suffering. People in India are suffering. And people in Africa are suffering. So how is that different? So, well, because you're paying for it. Because you're a partner in that crime. You know, when we talk about war crimes and crimes against humanity, we are using the strict definition that was introduced by the United States after World War II, because American scholars wanted to introduce provisions that would prevent the likelihood of something to happen just like what happened by the Nazis, what took place or what was done by the Nazis. I'm not just really, this is fact. This is a fact that American scholars kind of tweaked and defined what is a war crime and what is a crime against humanity to prevent the possibility of something like what the Nazis did to be repeated. So when we talk about war crimes and crimes against humanity, we're using an authentic definition of what that is, what that entails. So as American citizens and as American taxpayers, how is it that we're paying for it? Everybody knows that we're paying for it. I don't have to tell you that we give Israel $3.5 billion every year. But one thing you might not know about, and I think if we share this, or these couple of facts with our fellow citizens, with our neighbors, with our friends, with the churches and the synagogues and well, some synagogues. and other places and civic organizations that we go to, if we share this information with, I bet you an average American is going to turn WIFM. One fact. According to Congress, Congress makes laws, as you know, and Congress made the law that, unlike any other country in the world that gets aid from the United States, you know, like Egypt and every country in the world gets huge sums of money from the United States. The way they get the money is that we keep the money in the bank for them. They come shopping in the United States. They buy the helicopters and the tanks and the bullets and the machine guns and their money suits and everything else, and we pay for it. Unlike all these countries, Israel gets all of the money at once. $3.5 billion gets transferred to Israel's account. Lump sum payment. However, Congress made it that we have to pay lump sum, but also Congress said, by January 31st, you have to give them all of the money. You have to give them all of the money, a single payment by January 31st. It is the law. Congress, the Department of Treasury must oblige. And what happened is that the Treasury at times had to borrow the money. They did not have the cash on hand. They had to borrow the money in order to fulfill the obligation, give Israel $3.5 billion. And when they borrowed the money, they paid $65 million in interest on the money that they borrowed. Israel all of a sudden have $3,500 million in its lap and cannot spend it all at once. What do the Israelis do? They turn around and they invest it in our own treasury bond and they make $85 million on the money.
Yes.
Very good business. But I bet you, if you ask Joe Bob out there in Des Moines, Iowa, he's going to be one pissed off person. I mean, imagine how an average American is going to react to that. And now don't take my word for it. You'll find this on our website, by the way. And give a plug here, amjerusalem.org. But you don't have to check our website. Go to Congressional Research Service, CRS. This is the report that they did in the second part of 2003. The Cranston Amendment, we used to give aid, basically a loan to Israel, and we'll forgive that loan. Sometimes give them $1.5 billion, we'll forgive $1 billion, and they'll owe us $500 million, and the next year we'll have to kind of do some calculations. And Cranston was a senator, thank God he's no longer a senator. He said, well, we'll introduce that legislation. Of course, like everything else relates to Israel, everybody agreed. And the Cranston Amendment says that Congress is not allowed to give Israel aid in an amount that is less than what Israel owes the United States in principal interest. I mean, how would you like to have that kind of relationship with your banker? I certainly would. But imagine if we're able to share, and I think we have the ability to share this kind of information with our friends and neighbors, and to say, you know, there's more to this issue than what meets the eye, as far as, you know, the Israelis are, of course, the victims and so on. You know, talking about hearings on the Capitol Hill being in Washington, D.C., I mean, those hearings, about a dime a dozen. And last week, or 2 weeks ago, there was a hearing about the wall. And you know, the Judiciary Committee, the subcommittee, Middle East Subcommittee in the International Relations Committee is really very populated with extremist pro-Israel members of Congress. And in that hearing, even though we begged on their door and we telephoned and we sent letters and we sent emails saying, we would like to present our side of the story on the wall. Of course, they only had Dennis Ross and one other guy who works for, AIPAC, the Israeli lobby, do the presentation on the wall. And I sat through that hearing, and if I did not know any better, I would think that the Israelis are doing the Palestinians a favor by building the wall. I mean, really, you sit there and they just talk about it, and just a very powerful presentation about what a great idea the wall is. And Gary Ackerman, who's the ranking member of the International Relations Committee, and Eliana Ross-Linton from Miami, Florida, and Dennis Ross, and the fourth speaker from AIPAC, stood there, and every single one of them repeat the same line and say, this is about terror. If there was no terror, there'd be no wall. And then they immediately immediately, I mean, within like less than 30 seconds, they moved on and they start talking about demography and how the demographic situation is, and they have very good, powerful board presentation about the numbers, and they agree with Dr. Mustafa Barghouti about the number of Palestinians and how dangerous it is, and we really need a wall and say, and I raised my hand.